if the whole team is here, then they can simply talk, about anything. Like after the session or before the session, while everybody is preparing, they can talk about anything that they want to talk, right? So that's the second agenda. Third agenda which we have is uh, currently we are doing it in within our company, but we want to take it outside, like somewhere properly with on the meetup arranged, and with banner and all. Please go on mute. Rohit, please go on mute. Can we mute Pradap from our end? We can mute, no? Okay, he's mute. All right. So these are the three things. Like we want to do it properly. This kind of session. I also want a name for this kind of session, and we want to do it properly. We want to do a PR on this. Next time, we want to also do a calendar, like who and all is going to speak every bi-weekly. We will do it. So. So we want to do it a little bit formally with all the proper equipments and all. We also want to do it on the YouTube live and all these things. Slowly we will do that. Okay. So this is the first session that we are going to do, and it is not very well prepared, uh, but I hope like slowly we'll get there. Okay, and now over to you.
Yes, thanks Vishwas. So, thanks everyone for taking time for this session. So, today we will be looking at how we perceive identity on internet and how blockchain is enabling us to make a paradigm shift to how we own and access our identities. So, without any further ado, let's get started. Okay, now I want to ask you a question. So when I say what,
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you please introduce yourself before going present?
yeah, sure, no. So yeah, hey everyone, my name is Arnab Ghose, and I'm currently working as a blockchain engineer at Hypermine. So I'm involved in building the core blockchain network, which is Hypersign Identity Protocol, which we will be looking into it in this presentation as well. But just to brief you about it, it's basically a blockchain, a sovereign one, which helps us manage decentralized identifiers uh, uh, with it. So yep. Okay, so now let's get with the presentation. Okay, yeah. So I want to ask you guys, when I say identity on the internet, what comes to your mind? Uh, so feel free to share your opinion on what you think about it.
Can I share?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So sorry, how I typically look at it is that if I want to do anything, right, and I'm not just talking about the internet, right? I'm talking about buying an airline ticket, talking about entering the airport, talking about driving a car or whatever. I need to in some way show that I it's actually me who is doing that. So in reality, it's different because you can show your face, so it kind of makes life easier. But in a digital environment, for me at least, in my personal opinion, identity is a way of proving to a certain person or a website or an application that it is actually you who is um, doing that certain task or requesting that certain action in the digital environment. That is how I look at using identity on the internet.
Well, I certainly 100% agree with you. So, is there anyone else who wants to share their thoughts?
Yeah, so basically when I looked at it, what is identity on internet, first thing came to my head was say Facebook, Gmail, Snapchat. All these things are where we create our identity on internet, I guess, according to me.
Right. So, yes, that's what exactly it is. So, identity is basically identifiers that we get from service providers. Now, service providers as you told. It could be Gmail, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. And that's how our identities are defined on the internet. Right. Now, the thing is, there are certain problems with these identifiers on the internet currently. So, what are they? So, let's look into it with two examples. So, here is Bob, and Bob is a YouTube content creator, and he has been on the YouTube platform for a very long time. He has garnered over millions of subscribers with the amazing talent that he has, and he has made a mark on YouTube with his content, right? So everything is going well and all for Bob. Now what happens is, one day YouTube decides to you know shut down Bob's, or not shut down, I would say, uh, not allow Bob to use YouTube, right? Because of certain violation that YouTube thinks that Bob has violated. So you see, in an instant, Bob has lost that proof that he is a legitimate YouTube content creator. If Bob wants to, if Bob goes around and says, "Hey, I have been on YouTube and all." Now, if someone asks him, "Okay, so what's your proof?" But since Bob is not able to even access his own account, there is no way that Bob will be able to prove that he has been on YouTube for a very long time, and this is very depressing for him. Now, a second scenario could be like, suppose uh, Bob has been working in Walmart for a very long time, and like every other company, Walmart issues a health insurance for Bob, right? For a specific credentials. Now, after a few years, Bob decides to switch to Microsoft. The problem here is that the insurance that Microsoft will issue to Bob will not be the same uh, credentials that he was issued earlier in Walmart. So it will be with a different credentials. Now we clearly see that with these two scenarios, we can clearly see that Bob was never even owned his own identity on those platforms from the day one itself. It was all on the mercy of the service providers or the platforms where he has registered himself. So likewise, there are many problems with current online identifiers. So the number one point is, as we have seen, you don't really own your identity on the platform. It's the platform who issues you the credentials, and they only manage everything, right? And in an instant, if they want, they can snatch your access to your credentials on their platform. Next point is, you can't disassociate yourself with the platform. So let's take an example of Facebook. We have all used Facebook, right? And let's say you decide one day, okay, I'm done with Facebook, and I just want to delete my account, right? So we have the we have the facility to delete our account, but you know of all the time that we have used our Facebook accounts, it has linked to various activities. Now, although Facebook tells us that, hey, we have deleted your account, but still, what's the guarantee that if we have really been disassociated with our identities, that our identities on those platforms are not associated with all those activities anymore? We don't certainly know for sure. The next thing is, identifiers can be linked with other platforms, which could lead to serious privacy issues. Say, again, let's take the example of Facebook. Now we all know the content that we search for on Facebook, right? if we search for something like, cool t-shirts and all, or something, we write a comment on someone's profile that, hey, what a great t-shirt you got there, and the next moment the algorithm recommends us the t-shirts from Amazon, right? So our preferences, or our data points, if I say technically, are being linked here, and those are also linked to our identity, which is the Facebook ID, right? Which is seriously not something that we want, right? We don't want Facebook to know what we like and what we don't like. We have our own preferences, but this linking seriously causes some privacy issues. The next is, identifiers are associated with passwords, which are definitely prone to hacks. Current identifiers are basically username and passwords, right? And they are all stored in a centralized database, which resides with, whose responsibility resides with the service provider in this case. Now, in any case, this database is compromised, right? Our credentials are, as a consequence, are compromised, right? So this is a huge risk. There are hundreds of them, and managing multiple identifiers becomes a mess. Now, for every service that we register, so they give you the option of entering your email address and a unique password for that service. Now, we might have we have all, on an average we register for many services. One for health tracking app, another could be, uh, for for some games or anything. And as we start using multiple services, it becomes a burden for us to manage all those, user ID, password, remembering all those things. So it becomes a real mess out there. So what should we looking so what we looked at what the issues here we are dealing with current online identifiers. What really could be the solution to address all this, right? Let's try to build something, you know
Sorry to stop you here.
yeah.
Before we move into the solution part, I just want to add few things which Arnav said, right? Uh, when he asked the question about what is the identity on the internet, you guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, yes, sure.
So when he asked the question about identity on the internet, did you guys notice there were two types of answers which came from the audience? One guy, Irfan, was talking about the real world identity, like your passport, because he was talking about it. He was thinking from the digital identity perspective, where he wants to, let's say, get access to, let's say, an airport. So how he can prove himself as a that he is an Irfan, right? He's Irfan. Whereas this guy, Pankaj, talked about an identity, like when he has to, when he replied saying that, hey, for me, identity is just some social identity that I have, right? So whenever we come up with this kind of narration, like whenever we talk about identity, these are the 2-3 narrations that comes up, which means identity word itself is a very abstract word, and there are a lot of things going around it, right? So there is no one thing that can say that, okay, what is identity? Which is why this presentation was really literally focused on the identifier part of identity. We have identity, real identity in our real world. So we are not talking about that. We are talking about the identifier. Normally, the moment you switch on your internet and you have like so many apps where you want to log in, or you want to get access to, you don't show your passport to log into some application. You usually make use of the identifier which is issued to you by these platforms. So that is what he was talking.
Can I just add on to one point?
Yeah,
And
sure.
I think it's fundamental to understand what Vishwas is trying to say. That and he's right, like that. If you take the two scenarios that were discussed earlier, so one is the passport and the other is Facebook, right? They are your identifiers. But please don't ever forget that if the government wants, they can revoke your passport, and if Facebook wants, they can delete your account. So there is a huge question of ownership that has to be discussed here.
Yes, 100%. That's the crux of, you know, the thing that we are discussing here. Who owns this? That identity or identifier, whatever it is, it's not us who are owning it, right? So, but then if you think about like if you really want to solve this, the starting point would be these identifiers. Like once if I can, you know, own this identifier, maybe in future I should be able to own my credentials also, like the KYC or whatever, the passport and all. Maybe because end of the day, all these credentials are actually linked to some identifier. Your Aadhaar card is linked to identifier called Aadhaar ID, right? But we don't, we neither own Aadhaar ID and nor we own Aadhaar card. So you get it, right? We are talking about the identifier. I just wanted to clarify that. All right, Arnab, you can
Right.
go ahead.
Yep, sure. Okay, so now we know the problem here with online identifiers right now. So let's try to come up with our own, identifier or a structure that could counteract all those problems that we addressed so far. So let's build a new identifier, and let's say we call it a name, NID, or it could be something else. Yeah. Okay. Now, what should be kept in mind while we are designing this identifier? It must be ownable, right? We should be in our control. It should be in our control, unlike what we saw in case of Bob, right? His account got his account access was taken away from him in an instant. Now that shouldn't happen, right? Your All his hard work and all, ha- it literally went into vain. So it should be ownable. We should own this. Second is, it should be public. Now it may be public. Now this really depends on the application that you're targeting. For example, let's say you want to access your healthcare records. You know, now healthcare record is something that you would definitely don't want the entire world to know about. It is something that you would rather keep to yourself. So in that case, an identifier can be private with you. But let's say in case of a YouTube account or any social media account for that matter, where you want where your content needs to be seen by everyone, in that case it has to be public. Your identifier must be public in that case. Third, it must be unique. Now, this is this is quite obvious. If I create an identifier with a certain ID, it shouldn't collide with anybody else's identifier, right? The fourth point is immutable. Now, this is pretty important because you have created that identifier, and you definitely don't want anyone to even tamper with that with your identifier. It should be in your control and not anybody else's. The last point is, it must be secure. Now this is also quite obvious, right? Because it you know I mean, it could be prone to hack, right? And we definitely don't want it to be prone to those hacks, so it must be secure. Sorry, and the last one would be, it should be cheap to create. Now, if we talk about creating emails, right? Emails doesn't cost us anything, right? We can create as many as email IDs as we want, and it's something similar that we also want for our identifier as well. It shouldn't be a cost burden for us to create identifiers. All right. Now, thankfully, there is something called as decentralized identifier, which actually is type of identifier which is unique, globally available, and cryptographically verifiable. Okay, so we have three things here, right? So let's get into each one of them in a bit detail. So unique. Now, as it says, unique in the sense that uh, every decentralized identifier, every DID, has its own unique ID, right? And the one that you create, it doesn't, collides with any other DID that someone else might create at that time, right? Second is it's globally available. Now, say that you have a YouTube account, right? And it is associated with a decentralized identifier. Now, there is someone who is asking you that prove me that this is your account on YouTube or any other platform for that matter. So it will be pretty much easy for the other person to actually verify your identifier from anywhere, right? So that's what globally available means. Cryptographically verifiable. Okay, now this is where we say goodbye to passwords. So okay, now since we are eliminating the need for passwords, so how can we make sure that it belongs to us only, and no one can access it uh, without our permission, for that matter, or if you don't want anybody else to access it. So what we have is basically a set of public and private keys, and that's what the cryptographically word here means, that we have a set of public private key which will act as a proof that will certify that this DID belongs to me. So just to explain you a bit how is that this can be achieved is, now public key and private key. Public key is something that is known to public. Everybody knows my public key. It is something that is known to everyone. Now private key is something that is something that should be kept to one. It shouldn't be shared with someone. So what happens is, now if we want to prove something, if we want to prove that this DID belongs to me, what I can do is I can use my private key and sign the uh, decentralized identifier. Now that I've signed it, the other guy who wants to know whether this DID belongs to me or not can use my public key and uh, decrypt that signature, that signed document. Okay, so what is this signed document that I'm talking about, right? So okay, now when you go to a website, right, with https something google.com, once you type that in a web browser, you can see that there is a uh, green there is this https text which highlights to green, and what that is basically indicative of is that it is certified by a central authority, right? So it is digitally signed. That certificate that the website has is digitally signed by a central authority. So similarly, we have this did document, this decentralized identifier, which is signed by us and can be proven by anybody else. So that is what cryptographically verifiable means. So does anybody have any question regarding
But it
decentralized?
cannot be proven by anybody else. It can be verified by anybody else,
Sorry,
right?
yes, correct. Huh.
Yeah. So you will, because you have the private key, you can sign this, your credential, and send it to anyone. Now anybody can verify that. The example which we were taking about that SSL thing, their server signs the message because it has the private key, uh, and send the certificate over the browser, and the browser becomes the verifier over there,
Right.
right? So similarly, the case of YouTube which you have shown, where a user can produce the signature and give it to the YouTube, and YouTube becomes the verifier, and he should be able to verify and let user in access the service.
Right. All right. Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, does anybody has any questions at this moment? Okay. All right. Let's get going. So yeah, uh, how does a decentralized identifier look like? Is something like this. We have did. This is the syntax of what did is. It starts with did, and then after this, the second component is hs. Now this represents what is called as method. Now, a decentralized identifier can have its own standards, right? You know, HS here stands for Hypersign, that we have kept it. Now, as Hypersign uh, identifiers, we can, make our own standards based around it, and what it can do and can't do, and all the possibilities. Similarly, there could be other you know other projects which could use their own methods and specify their own standards. This third component is the unique ID. That is the first point that we discussed, which is generated in a way that it doesn't collides with any other decentralized ID that is ever created or will be created. So it's now this is different from GUID. Uh, so GUID is basic. What is GUID? So GUID is basically a concept that has been used in computer science for many years, especially in databases, where let's say consider a database where users are being added as they register for the service. So for every user that is being added there, there is this ID that gets incremented one by one. Or it could be something, something else, something complex also, not necessarily an increment paradigm, but something else. But it is different from the but how is it different from GUID is that GUIDs are something that is needs to be registered by a central authority again, and it should be stored in a centralized database, right? uh, but this is not the necessarily the case with decentralized identifiers. Okay. Now it is associated with did document. So what is did document? So did document is basically a structure which will hold the information regarding the keys which are associated with the particular did. So okay, ipad. Okay. So did document is a structure which defines the cryptographic keys. Now as I discussed that did has to be cryptographically verifiable. You That means it also needs to carry the information about your keys, which lets you verify your did. Sorry, which lets you sign or verify your did, right? And to describe what did ID can do, did document is that particular structure which is associated with a did, like a key value pair. Okay, so now this key value pair is actually stored on blockchain. Now, as we all know that blockchain is a distributed and immutable ledger, something that is once committed on it can't be reversed or anything like that, right? So blockchain becomes an ideal uh, technology where we can store this information regarding DIDs, DID. So the key value is did, the decentralized identifier, and the value is did document, which is basically you can think of it as the metadata for did. It describes DID. So let's now look at how it looks like. So this is how it's stored in blockchain. You have this DID over here, and this is the corresponding did document. Uh, Now, this is a minimalist did document. When I say minimalist, is there are many fields apart from this, and some of the fields are necessary to be included for the at least the basic operations, but there are other fields that can be added to make it more uh, descriptive and feature ready for many other applications. So let's just look at the basic ones that we need right now. So the first field that we will look here is the ID field, and this is just describing the ID for which we are defining all the structure. This is the ID that will carry all the information for it. So this is self-descriptive. The second field is controller. Okay, so what does that mean? Now, controller is basically an array which will have a list of DIDs, and those DIDs will have the access to make any necessary changes or even sign this particular did document. So as you can see, we currently have the same DID which is as that of the ID field. That means that this DID can sign this did document and also have the access to make any necessary changes to this did document. Now you can think of this scenario that, let's say, you made an account for a 10-year-old who is not computer savvy or something. You made this identifier for him. An identifier is made for him. Now obviously he can't go ahead and sign all those things. He's just 10-year-old. So what can be done is his dad can add his identifier over here in the controller field, and since that his father's decentralized identifier is part of the controller field, he can now make the changes in this structure. So that's the significance of controller field. Now the next is verification method, and this is uh, and this is the and this is where you basically have the information regarding your public keys stored here. Now this field public key multibase has the public key that you have used for this uh, did document. I have truncated it, but this is just a representation of what the value would be. It is defined by this whole structure is defined by a particular ID, like key one. This type basically defines what type of public key this is. Controller is again it will be the one you know so currently we have this ID as the controller here. That means that uh, this public key belongs to this particular DID. Okay, now what is this authentication? So authentication is basically a field which will enable us to log into the service providers. So let's say we have to log in into a YouTube account. Now it will ask for the signed document, right? So now the question is, there may be a scenario where we have multiple public keys here. Right now we just have one, but let's say we have multiple keys. Now we don't want all of them to be used for signing the document. Let's say we only want this one particular sorry, I went back. Yeah, so let's say we only want this one particular key ID to be accessible to enable us to log into YouTube. So that is where we define that the authentication should be only performed by this particular ID, which is this ID hash key one. This is the ID of public key. Yeah, so this is just the basic relationship between did and did document. Okay, so now we have seen did uh, decentralized identifier in a technical in a technical depth. So these are the properties that it has. It is unique to a specific cryptographic key pair, right? So you know, if you have the key pairs, so basically it means that if you have the keys, you own it. That's the simplest way to put it in. The second is it's stored in a decentralized ledger, which is blockchain. So it makes it immutable for anybody to even tamper it. Right? Its ownership can be proved. You have the keys, you can prove uh, your ownership. Anybody can verify it, and it's pretty cheap to manage on a blockchain. So it is very easy to create and manage and make amends to your decentralized identifiers. Now, did you notice the similarities between the properties of DID and the design goals for the identifier that we were looking at earlier? Pretty similar, right? It must be ownable. Definitely we own it. It may be public. It is public. Blockchain is public. So, yeah, this is public. It must be unique. It is immutable, of course. It is secure. Now, when I say secure, I also mean that since this blockchain is not owned by anyone, right? And you know, and it's very difficult to even hack also. So your IDs are basically secure on this chain, and it should be cheap to create, which again it is possible on blockchain. So now that we have seen that decentralized identifier is one of the key solutions for our, or more like a step to make our identities be more, to have ownership of our identities. Now we will look into Hypersign Identity Network. Now this is a blockchain that we have been working on till now. Uh, Now before we go into this, do we is there any question that you guys have regarding decentralized identifiers so far? Okay, all right, let's get on with it. So in a nutshell, uh, it is Hypersign Identity Network is a sovereign blockchain which is basically managing the decentralized identifiers. So uh, it is a so when I say sovereign, I mean it will have its own set of validators, you know, to which will add a security layer to it, and this is the immutable part or the immutable property of did, right? So immutability will be preserved over here. Now it is built using Cosmos SDK. So Cosmos SDK is basically a set of tools that we used to initiate the building of this chain, and this is W3C compliant. So W3C is a World Wide Web Consortium who basically works on laying out all the standards related to web, and they have a specific dedicated working group for DID specifications. So we have made sure that while building the identifiers, we are pretty much compliant to what they have mentioned in their specification. So what else? So what all you can do with Hypersign Identity Network? So as we know, we can manage the DIDs. By that, what we mean is you can create a DID, you can update the DID, you can make changes to it, and you can deactivate the DID. So what? So by deactivate, what that means is now something that is committed on blockchains can't be reversed or deleted just like that, right? So we can't basically delete decentralized identifier in an instant. So Deactivate what basically means is that that identifier will no longer be valid anymore. So that is what we mean by deactivate. We can do the normal token transfer like every other blockchain. So we can do native HID token transfer on uh, on the network, and any other tokens that we have on over the network. Third is we can pay for someone else's gas fee. So we have this very cool feature by which is provided by Cosmos SDK is that let's say that there is this user who wants to use Hypersign Identity Network, but they don't want to go with the hassles of loading their wallet with money, sorry, tokens, which because that is indeed needed for every transaction that is done on blockchain. So what can be done is, in this case, someone else, let's say the platform where the user wants to create his or her DID, the platform can step in and pay for the gas fees for that particular user. So that is what is possible in Hypersign Identity Network. Now, there are other things such as schema and verifiable credentials, uh, but we will keep that for the late in future for the future talks. So these are the few use cases that we have identified that can be solved using our network. So the one is ID and access management. You know, passwords are gone forever. It's all as long as you keep your keys with you, you own the identity. Second is IDO whitelisting, verifiable data markets, and KYC infrastructure. Now, to give you a peek into the work that we have done so far. So, back in Q4 2021, we were researching about Cosmos ecosystem as to how we will plan our approach in building the chain and everything. Q1 2022, we have launched our DevNet, which is running on our local servers, where we are testing the performance and the basic features uh, in a production level setting. Currently, in Q2, our aim is to uh, integrate the DevNet that is currently running with other Hypermine products such as Hyperfire and MetaAuth. Uh, to so basically, anybody using Hyperfire will be able to register their DIDs on our DevNet. And the following Q3, Q4, we will be focused on testnet and mainnet launch respectively. So now I will show you the blockchain explorer that we have built. Yeah,
Can I interrupt you for a second?
yeah, sure.
Just for us to understand, can you just briefly explain the difference between DevNet and testnet?
All right, sure. Okay, so DevNet is basically a small network that we are running for us to test how the blockchain will perform for us. So in this case, we are not inviting any validators to run uh, nodes for the network. It is just for us to perform any tests that we need to do, and to be confident on that it is working fine, the basic features that we want to test. What now testnet is basically, again, it's not a production ready environment, but what testnet really is that we will in this case invite other people to set up nodes for HID network, and they will be running those nodes. So in this case, it is pretty much similar to DevNet, but uh, the exception is that many more people who are using this you will be running our network with their uh, uh, will be running the network. So we can be it is basically a glimpse of how the network will perform in a production, uh, actual production environment. So we can figure out what all parameters are changing, what what are the you know points that we are noticing, the our observations, and we can work on it and uh, make our infrastructure more better, make the network's infrastructure more better. Now of course the last is mainnet, which is basically the real business, right? It's like run by everyone, and the tokens are the actual tokens which are being used to perform transactions with real transactions. Yes. So effectively that's the difference between these three. So I'll currently show you our explorer that we have built, a minimalist explorer that is connected to our DevNet. So this is the explorer we have, that is currently running. Now earlier we did some transactions over here, like for we such as token transfer, creating a validator, and creating DIDs as well. So if we go here, and we can see that we have a DID that is created over here. If we click on it, we can see the whole structure of the DID. This is currently registered on the DevNet. Along with this, we can see other things like the version it has, when it was created, when it was last updated, and whether it is deactivated or not over here. So yeah. Okay, now do you have any questions till this point so far? Anybody? Okay, all right. So yeah, once again, thank you for attending this talk. I hope I was able to share the all the necessary information regarding how decentralized identifier could be a way to a digital ownership of our identity, and how it could prevail over uh, the current online identifiers, which are riddled with a lot of problems. So yeah, thank you everyone. Yeah.
Arnab, one question. Uh, so basically, the explorer you was showing us will act as something once it's on the mainnet. It would act like something that people use to verify a credential, like how on ETH Explorer we are verifying the transactions. Explorer would work something like that, but for identities. And the network will be used like how Ethereum blockchain is used for transactions or smart contracts. It would be used to create the IDs. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, that is precisely the answer. So every DID that is being created will be displayed as a list, just how we see transactions. So yeah, that will be pretty much it. So regarding that,
Okay. Thank you.
yeah,
Actually, good question, Pankaj. Like, uh, so you not just for DID but also for the tokens. Like normally, whatever features that you see in any kind of explorer with related to token, that will be there anyway. Apart from that, because we are specific to DID also, you should be able to see someone's document, and you should be able to even make a request to them saying that, hey, I want to just verify your DID. So DID has a lot of other components which we have not talked. There is something called did communication also. So imagine I want to talk to you, like I really want to chat with you. You know. So right now, if I have your email address, then I can spam you anytime and keep pinging you. If I have your phone number, then there is just always one way, right? I can send you so many messages, but you cannot stop me. Even if you want, I will just try to use so many different accounts. Like all these guys keep pinging, right? All the insurance company, banking company, and all this ad companies, right? But with DID, what you will have ability is it's okay. Like you will get the messages, but then you also have ability to just destroy whenever you want, just like a temporary email you can think, and you
Mm,
can destroy as many as you want. So a lot of other features are also there. This whole DID infrastructure is a part of a technology called self-sovereign identity, which we have not discussed in this session. Wanted to just make it very short. So yeah,
okay.
yeah, cool. Thank you, Arnav. Like I really liked the way you have given the presentation. Everything was all right. Okay. Uh, with respect to feedback, mm, okay, I can't think of any. Like there was one feedback which I wanted to give you, but I forgot. But anyways, I will. If I comes to my mind, I'll just ping you over there.
Yeah,
So
sure, sure. Yeah.
so okay, you can stop sharing the screen. I just want to like talk about one thing before we close this call. Guys, how do we make it like formalized? So let's say if we prepare